How many foreigners contributed to the war of resistance against Japanese aggression. Some of them, along with their families, came to China for Wednesday's commemorative event. Among them, India's Mangesh Rajan Borkar, the grand-nephew of wartime medic Dr. Dwarkanath Kotnis, shared his reflections on the day.
I was really touched by President Xi's speech, where he really stressed on kind of reflecting back on the history, commemorating the heroes of the war, the fallen soldiers of the war, including Dr. Kotnis, and drawing wisdom from that history, and focusing on peaceful coexistence, focusing on building a shared future, where there is solidarity, mutual trust, peace, in building a future for humanity where peace will prevail, where people's sovereignty can be protected, and there is global peace across the world. That's what touched me the most. I think what left me the lasting impression was, I believe, the display and showcasing of the high-tech weapons that China has come a long way by with its defense system. China has now capability to combat any enemy that attacks China, but China wants to hold a peaceful stance. That is one thing that I would like to stress on.
Now, more on this event and its wider message of peace over war. We spoke earlier to Professor David Monyae, the director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg.
The Second World War that we know, the whole world talks in terms of 1939 to 1945. But Asia had its own unique the starting point. I think it started with the fascists regime in Japan attacking China, and therefore when the entire world joined in the anti-fascist war, China was already at the receiving end with fascist Japan attack within China itself. That led to a huge massacre of people, genocide. However, at times this is not really appreciated, particularly in the Western world. It is important to celebrate the defeat of fascism in Japan as well as Germany, Italy, Mussolini, Hitler, and the Japan. I think for a number of reasons. One, to remind the new generation the sacrifice made by our forefathers, particularly in Asia. And even though the African continent is far from Asia, but in looking at history, a lot of Africans contributed in the defeat of fascism and in assisting the allies, particularly in the Europe, but in the Asia side. I think if you look at the role played by China, is quite massive, and it's also important to also place those who sacrificed more. The history that we know is much more pro-West, particularly the West and Europe, is contributing more than at times the role played by Russia and China. The contribution of Africans in the Second World War and the defeat of fascism had a huge implication on the rise of nationalism and a very politically conscious leadership. If you look at leadership across the African continent, from your Kwame Nkrumah to down to Julius Nyerere, the entire generation was much more informed by other struggles that were waged against fascism, be it in the battles in Europe against the Hitler Japan, Germany, and as well as those who contributed in the Asia Franc, defeating Japan. And they contributed, they lost their lives They were never compensated and they're not recognized. And therefore, any celebration on the victory and the anniversary, particularly the 80 years, it raises a number of questions in terms of what kind of world are we in. A number of things need to be done. One is to ensure that the rules of engagement are strengthened. Multilateralism are back, playing a critical role in resolving global conflicts, particularly hotspots across the African continent, the Ukraine crisis resolved. In the Middle East, I think the Israeli-Palestinian crisis needs to be resolved. But far beyond that, fairness required in trade and ensure that all countries and the question of development is brought to the fore. And the language that we use a language that brings everyone on board, ensure that we reform the United Nations, particularly Security Council, and ensure that Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Asia. This is in the spirit of the Bandung Conference of 1955, the spirit of those who fought against fascism and taking the world to a better place, a better world